Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 128. And this episode, we wanted to talk about a certain aspect of psychology in video games. If we wanted to talk about all of it, that would be an entirely new podcast, and Matt and I don't have the time we barely have the time for what we're doing now.
True. Nor the credentials as well.
Yeah, right. We hopefully know our limits and are still learning them. That's the goal. But we wanted to talk a bit about anxiety and open world game design in particular, and where that goes, because it is open world after all. And because Matt and I do not have the credentials, we are thankfully and joyously joined by Dr. Rachel Kowert, the research director at Take This. Dr. Kowert, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited to have you. Rachel also has an incredible channel called Zeitgeist, where she talks about video games. My favorite is the psychology of Final Fantasy, which is a great video. Always my first one to direct the nerds towards, because usually it's pretty ubiquitously loved by nerds.
And the panel from PAX East about trauma and Final Fantasy VII in particular is fantastic. I mean, Rachel was not the only panelist on there, but it was absolutely just a hit parade, especially if you're a Final Fantasy fan.
Which I think we all are. We're in good company.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Goodness, yes.
Yeah, safe bet. And so we're so happy to have you. And it's funny, this topic came to be because as of when we're recording, not that long ago, we just got over, as if it were a condition that we suffered, Summer Games Fest. Yeah, our friend Geoff Keighley, everyone's friend Geoff Keighley, announced a lot of games. And one of the games that we knew was going to be there was Starfield, which is the folks who made Skyrim and Oblivion, their newest game. It's an open world game. Mr. Todd Howard, the man who loves games more than anybody else, came out on stage and talked a lot about what's going to be cool in Starfield. And for me, I was watching it, and typically, for those kinds of open world games, my reaction would be joy and interest and excitement. But it wasn't. When they got to the part where they were talking about how you could do space travel and go to all of these different planets and all of these different galaxies and all these different solar systems, I got anxious. And I talked to Geoff about it. I was like, there's a correlation there, right? It's not just me. The idea of looking at this giant world and being like, oh no, that's too much. And like, we'll go more into the nitty gritty of the individual games that have both made me feel this way and not. But like, Rachel, I wanted to ask, it's not just me, right? That's a common thing with those kinds of task list games.
Yeah, I mean, I would nearly universal thing. I would say I didn't watch the Games Fest as it was happening live, but I got like the TLDR, and I remember just like seeing like the bullet points, and I was like, no, that's not for me. Moving on. Too much.
Yeah, no, I definitely enjoy a certain amount of freedom in my games, but I think I actually enjoy discovering the freedom rather than having the freedom given to me.
Interesting.
Yeah, because more often than not, when a game gives you that level of freedom, I don't know, you can kind of have it come around the other way, where it's when you can do everything, what are you supposed to do? Well-designed open world games, they give you small tasks or small pieces to go from piece to piece. But I feel like something like Starfield, it goes a little too far.
Yeah, it's called analysis paralysis. That's the actual phrase for it.
Yeah, it is.
And when I was thinking about this episode, I was thinking about Final Fantasy, shocker, Final Fantasy VIII, and the way that you would level up your players and you would put the gems in the different things. And when you would open it up at first, it was like gem holes everywhere, right? It's like, what do I do? But then when you start going down a branch, just like any other RPG, I guess, it becomes more constrained. And I think that a good open world game does that for you, because if you just have every choice, it's like, what on earth? Where do I go? Where do I start? And it's anxiety inducing, just like you said.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like the way I first really noticed it is I loved Skyrim. I played it a ton. I still think Oblivion is the better game. That's a whole other conversation though. But like Skyrim, I played so much of, and like multiple times, and I loved it. And then when I eventually got the upgraded version on PC, I was like, oh, I should revisit this. You know, I played it originally on 360 and played the hell out of it. And I was like, I should go back to it, right? They upgraded the graphics. They added some stuff. There's new mods. I should check it out. And I loaded it up. The famous cutscene where you wake up and you're in a cart being dragged away.
Finally awake.
And I got through that part. I did the escape from the dragon. I got to the first town where you meet a family that can help you, and then a blacksmith. And I looked at the list of stuff that you can make at the blacksmith and went, nope, can't do it, and closed the whole game. Like, because what had actually happened was I opened that list and then I thought about, okay, well, if I'm going to play this game, I need to be this class. So I have to work towards this weapon and I need to work towards this skill. And I'm going to get these job skills and those talents. Because I'd played so much of the game, I knew it so well. I started already planning what I was going to do 13 steps from where I was. And immediately my brain shut down. I got analysis paralysis. I was just like, I can't do this. And I closed the game. And I think about that's very much like, the games that this company makes, that Bethesda makes, prides itself on not holding your hand, which is a great thing. But I think for me, as an adult who has limited time and a lot of anxiety, that's less helpful to me than it was when I was a kid. And I could do anything. I have 10 hours to play a video game, you know? And I'm just thinking more and more about it. And I think the Starfield thing touched on that in a similar way.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said too about how you've already played it. So you know how much you have to do. Whereas when it's fresh, you don't have that knowledge, right? You don't realize maybe how intense or how many decisions are going to have to be made.
Yeah, and I think also some of it too is, the knowledge of the decisions, which is actually easier and easier to get before you've made the decisions in the first place. I feel all of us are within a few years of each other as far as age goes, or at least we were all old enough to remember times before being able to easily Google your answers as far as what's going on, or the ideal build, or the best route through this game, or whatever it is. And you just had to pick and you just had to do. And sometimes you wouldn't even realize there was a problem. I often think of Chrono Trigger and how at the very beginning you run around the Millennial Fair and you don't realize that your choices have consequences until the trial.
Yeah.
45 minutes to an hour and a half later, depending upon how you're playing the game. You can look that up now, but because there is a wider community and greater communication, which is a wonderful thing, but because you can say, get good, you're playing it wrong, or, what is the ideal way to be playing one way or the other? Which faction, as far as Skyrim goes, what has the best drops on these things? Why are you playing shotgun on this game, or why are you any of those? You are already looking to what is optimal and ideal. And in a digital world, there can be optimal and ideal. And it gets easier and easier to be overwhelmed by differing opinions on what that means, because they're also, I feel open world comes with fewer true win conditions, which actually I feel like achievements kind of fill that in, if nothing else. I don't have a conclusion to this thought process. I'm just observing things.
No, but it's funny because it's also like, well, that's kind of kills the fun. Like I remember doing vanilla World of Warcraft and I was a balanced druid, which was the least optimized build you could have of
But it's fun.
Right, but it was fun. Mm-hmm. When I wanted to do endgame rating, oh no, I re-rolled Resto Shaman because it was optimal.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, for me, something that's become more obvious is I think it depends on the franchise or the kind of game. Like the Assassin's Creed franchise, and we've talked about this before, was one of my favorites early on. I love the first one. I love the Ezio trilogy. But by the time I got to 3 and Black Flag, it became a task list. And even I revisited it recently. I bought Origins, which is the Egyptian one, for, I think it was $10. It was on sale and people were raving about it. And, I wanted to try a really different environment. This is ancient Egypt. So the layout's going to be so different. And I got, 3 or 4 hours in, the story was interesting. But when I had a list of side quests and collectibles, I went, I don't know, I'm not interested. The only reason I got through Horizon Zero Dawn is because I actively ignored what that game wanted me to do. The game is designed for you to sneak around and get side quests and do all that stuff. And instead, I put it on easy, mostly meleeed my way through the game. I didn't do a lot of the stealth, and I bludgeoned my way through it. And it was a great story. But on the other hand, a game like Spider-Man 2018, which is probably one of my favorite open world games. A, I love Spider-Man, and B, that game felt less overwhelming, I think, because the traversal is so good. Web swinging is just inherently so fun. And I genuinely love that character in that world. And so I was more invested. I mean, we can't talk to the world's most well-known Henry Cavill and Witcher influencer without talking about The Witcher 3, a game that took me a couple of tries to get through. But I was telling Rachel this before we started recording. The only reason I finished it the second time I visited it is because I barreled through it just doing the story and the occasional side quest. I didn't give in to the side quest, which is a way you can play these games. And I'm sure that a good version of these games gives you the tools to do that and doesn't punish you for it. But I find that a lot of open world games do punish you for not doing the side quests, not going for the collectibles, because those are inherent in this giant world. I'm curious, Rachel, like for you, especially as someone with many children and a full-time job, it's hard for you to find the time to play these games. Do you find like you have to do the same thing? You have to kind of barrel through and focus in to get through these big games?
Yeah, I mean, I think this really plays into people's preferences and how they like to play games. So I am a completionist, which works against me in terms of having time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I want 100%. If I'm stuck at 99, I'm so mad. I replayed Final Fantasy X 3 times to get all the right dialogue options because you couldn't Google them to get them 100%. So yeah, I mean, I have like The Witcher 3, my husband and I played together and we started doing the side quests and we were like, this is a never ending pit of time. We cannot do this, and just barrel through the main storyline. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said a good game provides that option, because you can play The Witcher 3 and just do the main storyline. But this game that you're talking about that was talked about at the Summer Games Fest, can you? Is there any sort of linear path to get through a narrative? It doesn't really sound like it.
Yeah, because this is not a new thing for a game to necessarily have poor conveyance and how to go about an open concept. In looking at Starfield and learning about it, was taken back to a game I love bashing. And I try not to be somebody who's like bashing on games. I just have a couple where I'm like, I can't defend this. And it's Star Voyager for the NES. A game that not a lot of people have played. Certainly hasn't come up in conversation. But it's one that, also due to the nature of the Nintendo Entertainment System and not being able to give you a big text crawl at the beginning or cutscenes or anything like that, you run into your ship, you go off into space. What next? Everything I knew how to do in that game was because my older brother showed me how to do it. And I don't think he knew how to finish the game. And so you have nothing in terms of where to go and what to do. And I feel like, we might run into that a little bit in the endless vacuum of space. And I think there is something to be asked and answered and discussed in terms of how much guidance as well should happen and must happen in open world games. My spouse is a huge fan of games that let you traverse a wide area and explore, but paradoxically really likes having their hand held in going places, loves icons on maps. They started Assassin's Creed with Origins and were like, okay, cool. And when they found that there were some quests that you couldn't fully tick off, that they just kept happening, went, well, that's stupid. Those can just deal with themselves. Or those are DLC only. Well, that's stupid. So there's an interesting sort of how much being told where to go helps an anxious feeling and how much that hinders it in terms of like, am I doing this right? I don't know.
Yeah, it's called scaffolding. You should scaffold the player so they know what they're doing, because exploring the vastness of space with no direction sounds terrible. That sounds like unfun to everyone.
Only a small portion might enjoy that, but I don't think that's who they're making the game for.
No, I mean, I think they want a bigger audience than a small percentage. But, we haven't had the technology to make these kinds of games. A lot of these, with the exception of that NES game, but a lot of these open world games are a relatively new phenomenon, right? Like being able to have these massive worlds that you can just fully explore. And Matt and I were talking before the show about how we think this might have actually come full circle. And now we're seeing a resurgence in shorter indie games because a lot of us are like, no, I can't play 750 hours into this game, but I can play, unpacking in 4 hours and enjoy that game and then move on.
Yeah, no. And I think that when I said before that I enjoy finding freedom in my games, when you have a shorter indie title that takes 5 minutes, 5 hours, whatever it is to beat, you can then come back to it. And you don't feel bad about playing it wrong or right. You don't have any more than a moment's impulse of, I'm going to try something so stupid. Because you don't worry about when was the last time you auto-saved or which dialogue option have you taken. There's plenty of great dialogue options and trees and things in shorter indie games, but starting all over again is just, okay, that's fine. That's crumple up the paper and start again. You're not, having to paint over the Sistine Chapel to try again.
In Final Fantasy X, you have to pick this one dialogue option when you have an interaction with Riku and Sid. And if you don't pick the right option, you get stuck at 99%. And it happened to me twice. And I can tell you, I was not impressed.
You can't interrupt the historian. You must let him finish his stories. Every time, no matter what he's talking about, it's wonderful. Like, yeah.
That's not good game design.
No, it's not. I love so many other things about 10 too. There's
of course. I love all Final Fantasy titles.
Yes, all Final Fantasy titles are queens, but
yes.
She's a 10, but getting 100% is a pain in my ass.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's funny the games that are like a hard no for us or a hard pass and the ones that aren't. And like, for example, and Geoff knows this, and I've talked about this on the show a little bit, but like I got hard obsessed with Elden Ring. And like I've talked at length on the show about how I wasn't a Soulsborne game player. I didn't like those games. They were too hard. And then I became obsessed with Dark Souls 3 and went, well, I guess I could try Elden Ring. Ended up falling headfirst into it. And I think the reason Elden Ring was less intimidating is because you don't get a quest list. Like, you do get some quests, but you mark up the map however you want. Like, there are icons for everything, but like you can go wherever you want in a very similar way to Breath of the Wild, which is like you make your way and you decide what quests you want to do, but the game isn't constantly yelling at you or holding your hand. You have to do this quest first. It kind of just lets you go. And I think that kind of freedom feels a little different for me. Whereas like, I think the more open world games that I jive with more recently are ones that are open, but in a smaller space. I talk endlessly, if you follow me on Twitter, about the Yakuza franchise. And I'm currently, as when we're recording, playing Yakuza Like a Dragon, which is the series' first attempt at a JRPG version of itself. But it's still got the same open world, big Japanese city. But it doesn't bother me because I always have a waypoint telling me exactly where the next mission is, more or less. And like all the sub-stories are separate icons that if I want to do a side quest, which is what the sub-stories are in Yakuza, there's like no pressure to do it. I can just kind of wander in that direction and do it. And I feel like those games move at a different pace that I'm able to decide how much time I want to spend exploring and all that. And it's a much smaller space to explore. I can run from one end of the city to the other. I could also take a taxi, which is probably smarter, but like I can like traverse that space a lot easier than like the Lands Between, which is just an insanely huge map and subterranean map. And, you know, I think that for me, the more focus, like we talked about before, that a game gives me and then I can decide to explore is better for me than just going, here, go, do whatever you want. Like, I think I bounce off that more often than not these days.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a personal preference, but we're also not addressing the elephant in the room, which is that we're old and we don't have time. Because I feel like when we were younger, we would have been more game. Like an open world and 700 planets. Like, that sounds amazing.
Fair. I mean, I'm also thinking about what games can be for us and our journey through our mental health and who we are. One of the great joys of being old and attempting self-awareness throughout that is having constant moments of looking back on your life and going, well, that was a goddamn symptom, wasn't it? And as somebody who is a lot ADHD, like treatment plan and everything, there is something to be said for what video games are, have been, can be, and will be for me and my mental health. And in terms of engaging in my own anxieties and executive dysfunction and so many other things that are symptoms for me that may not be for anybody else. And I think even when I was a child, I would have been interested in the idea of an open world game. I'm still interested, but it's tempered by the knowledge that I am somebody who suffers from very poor prioritization because of my own executive dysfunction. And something that is an engagement for me, video games, to then sit there and feel like it's that part feels like work, or that feels like the wrong kind of work. You know, games don't necessarily have to be happy fun all the time, but they allow us to engage in certain feelings in certain situations, ideally safely. And so I think something like an open world game for me is just, it is a, what can I do? Everything. Shit.
Yeah.
Well, what do I do first? Well, break it down into small pieces. Great. I've broken it down into different regions. Well, what do I do? What's next? Everything. And so there's that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it comes down to the anxiety and the kind of anxiety that I suffer from, which you would think as someone who, you know, if you're a person who doesn't suffer from anxiety, which God bless you if you don't.
We all have anxiety in our lives. There is, however, like chronic or generalized anxiety. This is to say.
And like my anxiety can be triggered by different things. It's never always the same thing, which is so much fun. And like, I find that, you know, I have to compartmentalize the games I'm playing. Like I mentioned Yakuza a bunch. I don't get anxious playing that game because the listeners have a little bit of backstory. I lost my apartment in a fire a while ago and we were displaced and now I'm back. And so we have a beautiful couch and a nice TV. And like I lay on my couch because we have a chaise lounge like on the side. And you can just lay out and sit in front of the TV and play the game. That makes it easier to play these bigger games because I'm making it an experience. I'm sitting there, I'm relaxing. But like if I try and play one of those open world games like Elden Ring, which I was playing at my computer, where I also work and do editing and do any business related to this and other podcasts, it's less relaxing. And so Elden Ring, I was hooked enough that it didn't bother me, but like I've gone on and off with Nier Automata, which is or Automata, whichever. I'm never going to say it right.
You're never
twice.
going to be correct because someone's going to say you're wrong. And it's usually going to be me no matter what you say because I'm always wrong.
Like, yeah. But like, I loved that game when I played of it and I streamed a bunch of it. But like, I find that it's harder for me to jump back into it, even though I do eventually want to finish it because it's an open world game that I'm sitting at my computer playing. And there's like, I know there's like 8 endings and it's a continuing cycling narrative. And like,
there's 26 endings.
Yes.
Oh.
And so like, I've heard that you can get a lot of them quickly. It's the certain ones that take time, but like it's a hurdle to me in a way that like, again, it's staring down the barrel of a gun, to be overly dramatic for a second. Like I'm looking at this and going, all right, I have this much time to get it done. And also part of it is like, and it's not to be like a woe is me, I have games to play for my podcast and other stuff, but that's part of it too, right? Jeff and I have been lucky enough to get game codes and like interview developers, and I want to prioritize that stuff. And when those experiences are shorter, like recently we talked about Citizen Sleeper, like that I got through fast enough that I was like, oh, I could totally see myself playing that again. Or like I've talked about endlessly, Boyfriend Dungeon, I've played like 3 times now because it's a shorter experience. And so I'm more likely to jump back into it. But like, will I ever play Elden Ring again? I'd like to say yes, but it ain't going to happen. Just the amount of time that game takes, it's just not going to be probably worth my time. I want to play Breath of the Wild again before Breath of the Wild 2 comes out, which we know is on the horizon-ish sometime next year. I don't think I will, though, because of how long that game took for me to finish. And I think a lot of that stems from my own personal anxiety, time management, and like wanting to... I've hit a point where I want to experience as much as I can. It's why, and Jeff knows this, I bounced off of Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal so much, because it's a 100-hour game. Even if you're moving at a breakneck pace, it's like still an 80-hour game or 70-hour game. And that's like, I want to play it. And maybe when it comes out on Switch, they recently announced that the more recent games are getting ported to Switch. Maybe then I'll play it because I can take it with me. But like for the most part, looking at that hour count, I'm like, I can't. How could I do? Like it just triggers all of my scheduling, organizing, and anxiety related to that just by the number alone.
Yeah. And I mean, going back to play these big games too, it's like, I've already played them. I know I want to play them again, but I have this huge backlog of other things that I haven't played. You mentioned the Final Fantasy VII panel we did at PAX East, which was fantastic. But when I sat down to Celeste, who's wonderful and brilliant and great, she turned to me and she goes, I replayed the whole game a week before PAX East. And I was like, what?
Yeah, everyone's talking about like playing the compilation, replaying Dirge of Cerberus. You went back?
What? What is happening? I did not. I played it in 1996, whatever year it came out.
Yeah,
and
right.
I'm working on memory. So yeah. I mean, if I have, 100 hours to play in a game, I'm very unlikely to replay one that I already played, even though I love them.
And I will offer some contrast to most of the games that Matt just mentioned, because I did finish Persona 5 Royal. Yes, and it did take me and my spouse 169 hours.
Wow.
Nice.
Thank you. Several of those hours were definitely us just leaving the PS4 on as we both got distracted. And I think part of what made it easier is I played it with my spouse, who is an extremely productive human. If I had to pick a word, Sarah is very productive. Is
true.
Goal-oriented, ambitious, able to... for her, it's I will figure out how long it takes to do something, and I will set that aside, and I will do it. And we had guides, so we could figure that out. And I think part of what made the sheer scope of Persona, because I also played through Persona 3 Portable, which is what got me into the series. I was playing that on the Vita, so getting to take it with me a little at a time was fine. And because it's less of, here's the world, off you go. It's more of a, this is today. What will you do today? There's a lot of choices, but really, who's around today? Make those choices, go to the next one. And when it comes to the combat and everything, it was so much more linear. And I think that broke that down nicely. I'm very excited to play Nier Automata again because I'm very excited to play that on the Switch. I didn't get to play a lot of the DLC. And yeah, there are 5 main endings. And there's an ending for every letter of the alphabet. Most of them are you do a random dumb thing, and then you can just go back to your last save file. They make it very quick and easy. They actually fast forward through the credits in order to make it happen. Like, I can spoil 2 of them just off the top of my head. One of them is you're androids. You try to eat a fish. You're not supposed to take in organic matter. You die, and your dying words were, "It was exquisite." That's an ending. Another we got accidentally because we started one of the playthroughs and wandered off the wrong path, and it was the ending of, and they were never heard from again. Credits super fast, off you go again. And I think because that's also a certain kind of RPG that had a mission structure.
Yeah.
That even when it was open, it was like, you've opened this mission. I don't know, for whatever reason, it felt less task-oriented than something like Assassin's Creed does for me. I'm not fully equipped to sit here and break down exactly what, but it is interesting how defining open world can go in a lot of different directions and what the tipping point is. Because I feel like a lot of what we're talking about here is saturation.
Yeah.
Whether it is a need of too many hours from you, or there's too many options, or there is too large of a world. There's too much of one thing and not enough of another. You know, rain in the desert doesn't actually help the desert. It just floods it. So whatever our saturation point is, finding that is actually kind of interesting. It's probably great for finding what games entice you in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I think also part of it is, I mentioned interests earlier briefly, like how I love Spider-Man, and so made an open world Spider-Man game more approachable. Geoff knows I barreled through Arceus earlier this year. Like, I just demolished that game. And it's one of the, like, all Pokemon games are open world on a level, right? It's a big RPG you're exploring, but like, I blazed through that. But part of that was because I was playing with a bunch of friends. We were trading, we were talking about it. And I think that's some of where my anxiety comes from as well, is the anxiety of missing out, right? I can sugarcoat it however I want, but I played Elden Ring because I was afraid of missing out 110%. And I ended up really enjoying it. But like, I am more likely to enjoy an open world game after its heyday, as it were, because people always want to talk about games, especially depending on the circles you're in. And like, I'm finding even now with, like, I started doing Twitter threads for a lot of the RPGs I've been playing through, and people are really engaging and really like talking to me and asking me what I like and all that stuff. And that's been fun. And I think that's more exciting than doing it when it's live. And I think something like Starfield, which started this conversation in the first place, I'll be more likely to engage with after than during. But that said, if I do that, the initial anxiety that I think is very common to anyone who suffers anxiety is like, this fear of missing out that's not real, right? Like, oh no, if I don't do this thing now, I'm going to miss it. When in reality, you can talk about the thing with the people you care about whenever. But I think that's where a lot of it stems from. Also, you know, you both mentioned World of Warcraft earlier, and like MMOs also, I think, hit the same anxiety as other open world games for me. But I've talked at length about this in many places. I've become obsessed with Final Fantasy XIV because I found out, even though it's an MMO, you can literally skip every side quest and just do the main story. It's going to take me a while, and I recently bought the Endwalker expansion, which comes with all the other expansions, and I think I'm in Heavensward, the second one of 5 or 6. And so I'm taking my time, and it's going to take a while, but I feel no pressure because A, I have a bunch of friends who are obsessed with the game and we'll talk about it no matter what, and B, I can play it my way and just kind of make my way through. And I think ultimately, look, anyone who suffers from anxiety, half of the battle is just trying to talk yourself out of your own tree, right? Like, a friend of mine kind of unlocked the Matrix code when they said, anxiety is just sad excitement. Like, it's the heart pounding, all of that is the same feeling physically. It's just your perspective. And so you can, it's not everyone can, but it's possible to manipulate anxiety into excitement. And I try and do that, right? I try not to get like lost in the weeds, but I think a lot of it comes from looking at like, well, I have to do this, or I want to do that, or, you know, all those kinds of things, getting in your own head. And I feel like there are definitely games I've missed out on because of something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like we're all touching on, we don't want a task list, like grinding, right? Nobody likes grinding in games, grinding, in Gadget Zan to level up. I'm still
grinding exclusively.
You
Yeah,
know?
no. Sometimes that's just like that is my way of grounding myself, but no, I don't want a game that's pure grind. You're right.
Right. And having a sense of autonomy, which is what you're talking about, free to make the choices, which we know is one of the main reasons why games are so fun, is because they give us a sense of autonomy. So if it's just an open world, or if it's a world with a task list and we feel like we're just grinding through it, of course that's not fun. But I don't know how many people find that like really super, super fun.
Yeah.
Maybe a few.
I mean, I feel like also for me, the relationships and the characters carry me through. I mean, to the end of time, Yakuza will be a franchise that's defined by its characters and its narrative. But in a similar way, wouldn't be an episode like this if I didn't bring up Mass Effect. Like, the Mass Effect franchise, you would think starting the Legendary Edition, which I started for the third time, on my Steam Deck, and starting from the first game, I would get that same kind of tunnel vision anxiety that I talked about with Oblivion, right? You'd think, starting 1, I'd be like, well, I have to make these choices to make that choice all the way in 3 to get this ending. But I don't. And I think it's a familiarity, which Rachel mentioned earlier. And I think B, every time I play this is really corny. Every time I play Mass Effect, it's a brand new adventure. And what I mean by that is I go into some of my playthroughs with some intent and some fan fiction narrative control. But for the most part, I am not one of the people who plays Mass Effect over and over again for the same result, which is a fine way to play it as well. Mm-hmm. And I know plenty of people who've romanced Garrus every time they've played, which more power to you. But like, I want to see what the other options are in these games every time I play them. And so I think that excitement circumvents the anxiety of like, what about getting to the end? Also, I know Mass Effect and Final Fantasy VII and Chrono Trigger and some of the other games that like I know like the back of my hand. If I drop it for 6 months and then pick it up again, I'm not going to be lost or confused. I'm going to pick it up and go, all right, what did I do last? What's my log say? Where am I in the galaxy? Like I can just pick up and go. Whereas if I am playing a brand new game, like again, Starfield, which has been the crux of the conversation, and there are no guides yet, and I don't know what's going on, and I drop it for 3 months and then come back to it. I mean, like that's a famous problem in RPG and open world games, right? Is I don't know where to go next. A lot of them have gotten better about that, like your task list or the highlighted mission or whatever. But I think part of that is losing where I remember what I was doing and how to actually even play the game. Some games that are more basic or straightforward, the controls will come back to you quickly. But other ones, the more difficult games, like The Witcher 3 is not an easy game unless you're playing on easy like I did. Then it's a very easy game, which is my preference. You got to relearn the combos, which sword does what. And like that could be deterring as well because it's not going to tutorialize that again in the middle of the game wherever you left off.
Yeah, but you bring up a good point about the love for the characters. I mean, I love Geralt, obviously, but I also love Final Fantasy characters, like Final Fantasy VII Remake. I have 3 small children. I have no business playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, but I love the story and I love the characters, and that will take you through. You'll do a lot of forgiveness for the love of the characters, right?
You absolutely will.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking of a strategy that I have often taken on games, which is obstinately choose chaos. Which there's there's an interesting thing in terms of open world games where there's like, it also feels like, here's all these tasks, but you go about all of them the same way. There's just a lot of doing the same thing. And I do enjoy, again, finding my freedom. A game that I'm thinking of off the top of my head on this is any game of the Metal Gear Solid franchise, which is very much about exploring linearity in some of its earlier titles and exploring the consequences and the feelings on that and the relationship of gamer and game. But it also gives you armaments and equipment that you might use once but can be applied almost anywhere. There's a term that was thrown about by Kojima and his team, and I'm blanking on it. It was a pretty straightforward term, and I'm pretty sure it was multi-level story, where the story was straightforward, but how you go about it yields different fruit. The example of that is when you go see Psycho Mantis in Metal Gear Solid, and he reads your memory card and your mind and all of this. He has so many different responses based on what you do. You still see him. He still talks to you. You still have to fight him. But there's 6 different ways to defeat him. There's several different weird, dumb things to go about. And if you decide I'm never using a gun, I'm just going to punch everything, or all I have are these C4 explosives, how many guards can I stick these to the back of them? These are just digital guards. I'm going to run around to do this, do this, do this, do this. Are you completing your mission? Kind of. Kind of. And it still moves you forward. And that's something where, again, it's a very straightforward narrative. But in more open world games, it's whatever your focal point is. If it's a game where you can choose whatever weapon you want, I'm going to focus on hammers. I'm going to focus on daggers. I'm going to focus on whatever that is, and having it be your anchor point, I think, is very useful for moving forward and making choices. And maybe that anchor can shift, but when it becomes a matter of, oh, there's all these new weapons, look at all of these things they do. I've decided that dexterity is king. And does it give me dexterity? No. Fine. Does it look pretty? Yes. All right, but it's on thin ice, and you just kind of go from there.
Yeah, you're tailoring your choices down. It's like the talent tree. You pick one branch and you just go with it. I imagine you liked Fable.
Yes and no.
That's a different story. Okay.
Where you're coming from with it? Yes, I loved that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think also these games give you so much freedom that I feel like sometimes, especially for me with my anxiety, I make my own rules. Like, I believe it was last year. I don't know. Time is a lake and nothing makes sense anymore. But I think it was last year I played Ghost of Tsushima for the first time, which I'd never played. And I loved it. And I loved the old school samurai kind of narrative storytelling of it. But like, I did a lot of the side quests in that, but not all of them, because the way the map is laid out, it's a long island from top to bottom on the screen, and you kind of ran up and down it on your horse, and you could fast travel. And like, I kind of gave myself like rules, like, all right, I can do 3 side quests and then I have to do a story mission so I can keep the story moving. And nobody made me do that. Some might argue it's a poor way of playing the game, just do whatever. But that allowed me to stay on target in a similar way. Like, I'm playing through Andromeda for the first time for Reignite, my Mass Effect podcast. And like, I don't know that playing it with like a mission layout is the ideal way to play this game. I'm still on the fence about it because I've never played it before. But I think Frankie's episode map for the show at least makes it more bite-sized and digestible. I'm afraid that when I go back to it, like Dragon Age Inquisition, I'll get analysis paralysis again. Like, Inquisition, I love and is actually one of my favorite games. But I've only played it through completely once. And I've started like 3 new games. One is a mage, one is, I think, a ranged rogue. And like, every time it's like, I'll get to the Hinterlands, famously a giant map with almost no end in sight, do a bunch of the missions, and then be like, all right, I'm good. I'll come back later. And like, the game doesn't really start off until you get your hold and start to put together the Inquisition. And like, the fact that they push that so far off, and I think the problem with a lot of modern open world games is that they feel the need to fill the world. And I think filling it with missions and quests is not how you fill that world. I think games like Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, The Witcher, and the like will always feel more full because of the character and life of the world. And the checklists are there and the missions are there, but it's not required for you to engage. I think that was my same thing with Ghost, is like, that world was so vibrant and the characters were so interesting. I didn't care that there was a bunch of stuff to do. But when you get to a world where you're just not sure, or like, notoriously the Bethesda characters in the Oblivion and Skyrim games and even the Fallout games, some of them are really interesting and really cool. Others are kind of just there to fulfill the need, to give you a quest. And I think the more world filling you do to just kind of fill the space somewhat needlessly, is the harder those games become to engage with, at least for me personally, and the anxiety that I feel when playing them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. When you look at the research that they talk about analysis paralysis in game design, they say not the best way to mitigate it, but the reason that you have it is because you don't know if your choices matter.
Right.
And I think that's what you're getting at. The choices to me matter when I'm pushing the story forward, when I'm engaging with characters who are important to me. If you just give me Chadley from Final Fantasy VII Remake, he doesn't engage me in any way. And then I don't want to do his class. So yeah, I think that you shouldn't just fill it just to fill it.
Yeah, I think the reason to not keep beating a dead horse with The Witcher, but like Witcher 2 and Witcher...
You can. Never too much.
Witcher 2 and Witcher 3 are strong games because all of the side quests, they may not matter to the main story, but they because of Geralt's gig and the fact that he's a Witcher and the kind of jobs that he does, it fills the narrative in the same way that a lot of the side quests in the Mass Effect trilogy do. And then the ones in Andromeda don't. Like, my biggest complaint, which I've said on the other podcast, is like, fetch quests and task quests are fine, especially if you make an RPG and you need people to get experience and materials and other things, but like you don't need a lot of them, because if I'm just going from point to point to do a thing, and that thing that I'm doing has no narrative or story or even growth for the character, I'm just like, well, why am I going to do it? I mean, the reason that Fallout New Vegas, I think, is one of my favorite Fallout games is because most of the side quests feel tied into these territories that you're walking between and these factions that you're interacting with in a way that like other open world games don't always. And I think the thing that gets me about Starfield, just based on what I know about Bethesda's past, is they're going to do more of filling the world to make it feel full, not making it feel alive. And again, some people just want time and things to do, especially if you have an endless amount of time to play this game. You know, if you're a 12-year-old who is just really excited to play an open game in space and you have a ton of free time and you don't go out, sure. But as you know, people, right. But like for me, I need to feel that impact as I'm playing. Otherwise, I'm just going to be like, why am I doing this? Why am I playing this mission? Why am I doing that quest? And that just ramps up that anxiety. I think that the modern open world is in this impasse between, do we fill the world so it's full, or do we let the world speak for itself and just give like a main story? Because also, on the other hand, you don't want an open world game that you breeze through in 10 hours. Well, I do, but most people don't, because that's the whole thing, right? You want to explore. Exploration is a big part of these open world games. And if you can just breeze through it, a lot of the world's going to pass you by. And I think it's finding that balance.
Yeah, they need everything. You need for the explorers, but you also need the scaffolded path through the story.
Yeah. And I think it's okay if there's a 10-hour open world game if the world that's there is worth exploring and the characters are worth going back to. It's why all of the games we go back to, there's something about them. And usually the longer games, the bigger games, it is because of that world and it is because of those characters. I've spent the last 2 minutes trying to think of how to do this analogy correctly, but screw it, we'll do it live. I feel like fetch quests and those sort of tasks, it's like trying to do a shot of ketchup. Where if you are having a meal, having ketchup as a part of it can be great and it can be a nice thing. And sometimes you want to dip your fries in it or whatever else. And maybe just having a full-on like, dude, I'll give you $1 if you shoot this ketchup. Sure, that's interesting. And maybe an interesting diversion depending upon, especially if you weren't having anything that required ketchup. Yeah. But if you've just lined up a bunch of them or you just went, here's a whole bottle of sauce that has nowhere to put it. You filled the table, you filled the meal. That's not sustenance. That's not any of that. And I think regardless of the length, between scaffolding that leads you to a good narrative or story and characters or environment or consequences that hold value or weight. And sometimes they don't even have to be like storyline interesting. Maybe they just have to be ones that you just wanted to see that happen, for good or for ill. You wanted to plant all the flowers just to see if you could. You wanted to see what would happen if you knocked over every statue. Those have consequences and things, and even in a shorter game, it'll bring you back to do it. And you'll feel good about your choices to do it without quite so much paralysis in making those choices.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think also speaking to that a bit, Geoff, I don't know that every player has the same idea of what they want in those experiences. I mean, exactly. For example, famously I'm going to talk about Mass Effect again. I'm sorry.
You've already apologized. Stop apologizing. You've done it once. Keep going.
There's a lot of like conflict about how Mass Effect's open world stuff has been structured. Some people loved getting in the Mako, which has no gravity or logic, and driving around and exploring those planets and finding things and reading logs. And other people hated it because these giant open planets with like 4 things to do, and then you go off and you kind of go to another planet, 4 things to do, move on. But like then in 2 and 3, there's almost none of that. A lot of it becomes way more linear. There's exploration in the cities, but for the most part, like a lot of the mission maps are pretty, you can explore a little, but they're pretty much on a rail. And like people didn't like that either because they're like, where's all the exploration? And then we get Andromeda, which again, I haven't finished yet, where you get these giant planets with lots of things to do. But then lots of those things also feel like filler. Whereas like in Mass Effect 1, there was only 4 things to do. And so if you land on the planet, you know, I'm going to find a mineral, I might find an artifact, I might find some dog tags, and then I'll find a mission. Like neither of them are necessarily correct. And I think that the part of the problem is not just the game developers not knowing what to do, but the audience also doesn't necessarily always know what they want. I think we're still figuring out comparatively, open world gaming is pretty new, especially on the scale like we were talking about before. And I think the developers making these games are still figuring out how to do it, quote unquote, right. And I think a lot of it comes down more to personal preference. And that's why, like Rachel said, the proper scaffolding as well as these kind of side quests can kind of balance it out a bit. And if you give the player the freedom to go, oh, I could go do everything, or I could do nothing and just go straight to the next thing, I think giving those options are kind of the best of the games that I've experienced in the genre.
Yeah, like Animal Crossing. I just want to bring it to Animal Crossing. You can do anything in Animal Crossing, but at the end of the day, it's about paying off your mortgage, right? So you can plant all the flowers or catch all the fish or fill up the museum or do none of that.
Yeah, whatever way you go about having the singular goal, it gets you there. No, you're right. And it's interesting that a lot of the open world games that are having these sort of issues and that are engendering this discussion for us are large studio games.
Yeah.
Which I think is another part of it. You're dealing with a lot of like 1,000 fractal points of expectation, both within and without the development team and the management structure. You have what fans and people, quote unquote, expect of the game or want in the game. And sometimes those are metrics and benchmarks rather than ephemeral pieces of experience. Memorable characters sounds great, but it's hard to quantify. 500 hours of gameplay, oh, you can quantify that. And if you break a large team, a large development structure into smaller teams, and you develop this thing, you develop this thing, you develop this thing, and each of those are microcosms of indie game development with a larger structure that then has to go, and now we make these fit. And not in a way that emulsifies, but in a way that just simply sticks together and you put them all in the so-called open world. And it just becomes the canvas through which all of these happen and go. And that is an uncharitable way of looking at this. But I feel a lot of modern open world titles are coming at this with some form of that. I mean, Rachel, in one of your Zeitgeist videos, you were talking about gacha mechanics and the way that those are more often than not when a game company is putting their business practices before the player's experience. And I think those are also bleeding into in small amounts in a lot of those, which feeds into FOMO, which feeds into the idea that we're missing out on this. And especially because games can now have DLC or be digital only and then taken off of the storefront. I can go back to any PS2 game that I haven't played yet, and I have a lot of them, and I haven't played a lot of them, but I can do it. And even the large studio titles and the mess-ups, there's all that. And so there's a number, in much the same way that a modern open world game, there's a lot of angles that are coming at it, and you're not sure if there's any singular vision or what the most condensed vision is. Like, what is the smallest number of people that have the main vision here? I don't have the answer to that question, and I think that is a big piece of what feeds the modern version of this analysis paralysis.
Also, you have a lovely vocabulary.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I agree, Geoff. And I think like this has become more broader about just anxiety, I think, in relation to games, not just open world games. But it's funny that you mentioned gacha mechanics because I can actually thread that needle with open world games. Genshin Impact, a game known for its open world, its Breath of the Wild-like experience, but also has gacha mechanics, which, you know, I've seen worse and they're not awful. And like the game is fun, but I think I tried to play it and I bounced off it because I went, oh, this is Breath of the Wild, but there's more stuff in it besides Breath of the Wild. I think Breath of the Wild worked for me because it wasn't necessarily bare bones in the way that you think it doesn't have enough. I say bare bones in the fact that it was exactly what it needed to be. And one of the reasons it's not my favorite Zelda game, but it is one of my favorite open world games, is because I think there's just enough in it. It just does enough with the format and the quests and the stuff you can find that it feels just right. It's one of my hesitances about the sequel is like, are they going to dump stuff into it? But like Genshin Impact, which is a cool and interesting game, it's essentially anime Breath of the Wild, but you get hero characters that you can switch to, and it's a gacha mechanic to unlock them. They're all different elements, and like it just becomes overwhelming pretty quick. And I never really felt that overwhelmed in Breath of the Wild. I kind of just dawdled until I finished it. But in games like Genshin, where they took something that already felt kind of filled and then added more, is great for some people who are just looking for a thing to do. But for me, I was like, no, I can't stick with this. And I think ultimately with video games, it's a double-edged sword. Like I use howlongtobeat.com a lot.
Same.
When playing a game because I want to know what I'm committing to it. But I felt recently like I put off Yakuza Like a Dragon for a while because it's a 35 or 40 hour game. And a lot of the other Yakuza experiences were more streamlined. But like now I'm playing the game. I'm like, oh no, this game is great. I'm so glad I'm playing it. And it's a lot of reading and watching. Also, there's a lot of narrative in those games. So it's kind of like watching a TV show and playing a game, which is a nice mix. But like, I think I put it off because I was scared of that number. The number induced anxiety, not even just playing the game. It was like analysis paralysis before even analyzing anything, like just looking at the number. And I think for me personally, I'm trying to break that habit. And like, I think part of it is breaking up games with shorter games and like playing a couple of games at the same time. Like I'm playing through the Sonic Origins collection, which is just a repackage of the old Sonic games with some new stuff. And those are much faster to get through. Like, I think part of it also is, I don't know about either of you, and I'm curious, this is like my last question for the episode. Like, can you guys play multiple games at once? I can almost guess Rachel's answer, but like for me, like I can play a game per platform. Like I can play a PC game, I can play a Switch game, and I can play a PlayStation game all at once, like, and switch between them. But only one of them can be a big open world game if any of them are. I can't play more than one open world game at a time. It's too much for my brain to split and remember. I'm curious first, Rachel, and then Geoff. Rachel, do you have time to play more than one game at a time?
I mean, not really, but I have like Animal Crossing, right? You go, you check in, you come out, and then I can play, something else on the side.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I'm thinking about my Netflix backlog, and the new season of Umbrella Academy just came out, and we were finished.
That's very good.
I know. We were finishing Grace and Frankie, which is another and I was like, I can't start Umbrella Academy until I watched the last 2 episodes. And my husband was like, no, but people are going to start talking about it. I was like, I can't. I have to finish it first. But yeah, I'm a few episodes in now.
That's fair. Yeah, I could play a bunch. And some of that is in much the same way as you, Matt, where it's kind of like I can do one per experience type, as it were.
Yeah.
Because Switch and PC and PlayStation are all a bit different in how they are and where they situate, even if they sometimes situate in the same location. But I also often will have some open unfinished file in a game that I'm familiar with, in a game that I love, that I will often go back to.
Yeah.
I actually, a few days ago, booted up Castlevania Symphony of the Night, because that is my all-time favorite game. And between either exploration or grind or not, or just whatever it is, like that's one where I will choose chaos, because I learned about somebody trying to level up a sword that had no business being fully leveled up. And I went, how fast can I do that? And just kind of getting myself over there. And I don't need to finish it. There's no reward in it. Hardly any. But it felt good to go and to play and to do. And I would say I'm actively playing that, because I'm going to go back and I'm going to level it up a little more when I need a little time to do that. And I think some of it, comes down to, much like you were saying, Matt, they need to be some different experiences. Having something that I'm actively kind of chipping away at that's more of an arcade style experience. It's 250 levels and they're all short arcade levels. Great, I want that. Something that is, and I like having at least one large adventure happening. I feel like that's kind of the tentpole, and I feel like all of us love the big adventures. And also, I do have to say, this has been noted on the show. My spouse did not grow up playing JRPGs, was not a Final Fantasy fan, grew up with a lot of collectathons, and getting to share Final Fantasy with her has been one of the great joys of my adult life, where we've now played through 7, 8, 9, 10, and 10-2.
6.
Most of 6. We've played through most of 6. World of Ruin was actually too open world for her. She's like, what am I doing next? This is stupid.
This is stupid.
She's coming back. She's coming.
Okay.
No.
What?
No. What ended up happening was we grabbed a friend of ours who knows that game like I know Final Fantasy VII, which is to say, quiz me on it. I will defend my dissertation, and got us through a lot of those things. Like we have the whole party. We just need. I checked recently actually because we were looking at what to do next, of what game we wanted to play next, and it's like, did we never finish 6? We are at Kefka's Tower.
Oh.
We have the entire party. Do you want me to go like get us economizers or something? Because I'll do that. I'll go fight some dinosaurs. I don't care. And that would be one that would be kind of in that same way Symphony of the Night, where, I know Final Fantasy VI. It's a larger game, but it's like, let me pick something stupid to do in it.
Mm-hmm.
And having that you then build around other experiences. Like, what am I missing right now? What do I need?
Yeah.
in my gaming diet.
Yeah, like one RPG. Like I can follow one story at a time, but you can have like the arcade version or the one of the new dailies or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean that's true. Like I'm currently playing Yakuza Like a Dragon on my PS5, but I'm also playing Turtles, the new TMNT game but that's an arcadey game, which has story panels, but not a lot of story. And I think also Geoff brought up a good point. I am always at some point playing the Mass Effect trilogy constantly. Like there's just an open save file.
Nothing wrong with that.
On my PS5 and on my Steam Deck of 2 separate playthroughs. And like also obviously for Reignite, I'm playing Andromeda, which is an open save file, but that one's got a guide. I'm just, taking my time with it. And so like, I think the familiar experiences are kind of ongoing. I started a playthrough of Final Fantasy VII we were talking about before on my Switch when the Switch version came out. I think I'm up to the Dawn, I think is like that area, like when I'm dressing Cloud up. And so like, I can jump into that at any point and know where I'm going. I have a save file on my Steam Deck of Chrono Trigger going because, again, no pressure there. I have that game memorized, that kind of thing. But that said, I still haven't played the DLC for Remake, Intergrade, because I played it on the PS4. I haven't played it with the PS5 upgrade. I kind of want to replay it with the DLC. But now that they've announced the next one, maybe I'll wait and I'll play it right before that one comes out, like that kind of thing. And so I think the more familiar we are with open world games and old school games, the more likely we are to go to and from them than with games we don't know at all or that are brand new experiences.
It's still open, but it becomes less terrifying.
Right. Yeah. The anxiety, I think, is gone when you know what you're going to get from it and you know where to go.
Yeah. I now realize I have 3 different open files of Final Fantasy VII on 3 different platforms.
Amazing.
Nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that. I just think that says something about me, which is I have good taste.
Yes.
Wait, so 3 platforms. So the Switch.
No.
Oh, no.
On my PC, because I was doing a run on stream, and that's how I play Final Fantasy VII, on like a PS1 memory card because I was doing a run, and because I did the PlayStation Plus, the deluxe one, amongst the free games was the PS4 version, the update of Final Fantasy VII, not the remake, but the one with like the Steam updates. And I'm like, I can goof. I have insomnia right now, and I need something to do. Let me just turn this on. I am going to fight Shinra grunts until I unlock everyone's limit break. This is the time to grind because this is familiar, and this will calm me. This is my white noise machine. Let me have this.
Amazing. I love that. Well, Rachel, thank you for joining us for this chat. This was really enlightening. I would love for you to take a moment to tell folks where they can find you online, they can find your work, if there maybe is a children's book coming out sometime soon that you want to plug, or some previous books that have come out that you'd like to plug, things like that.
A little bit about Take This as well. I realized we should have done that at the top of the episode, but we mentioned it and then...
Yes. Sure. So you can find me on the internet. I have a website, rkowert.com. You can find out more about my research and my books there. I have a YouTube channel, Zeitgeist, where I talk about the science of games. I also work for Take This, which is a mental health nonprofit that serves the gaming industry and gaming community. And you can learn more about us on our mission to destigmatize mental health challenges and provide mental health information and resources at takethis.org. Also, there is a children's book coming out called Geralt the Grumbly because I have a healthy obsession with The Witcher. This has been established, but it's going to be excellent. And it's about meeting your friends where you are and loving each other for who we are and not trying to change other people, which I think is a great message for us all to hear as children or adults.
Amazing. Well, definitely go check all that stuff out. Rachel's amazing. Rachel's also been a guest on my interview podcast, CPOV Autographs. We had a great chat, mostly about Final Fantasy, and I think some other things in there too. But yeah, thank you again for joining us. This was a lovely conversation. We'll have to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me anytime.
Yeah, this is absolutely wonderful. And listeners, we want to hear from you as well, because we want to know, which open world games do you enjoy? Which ones fill you with an existential dread over what to do next? What's the smallest game that you just couldn't move forward because you could do everything? What's the biggest game that you were able to just blow through it because you had that working out for you? Where is the saturation point for you? How do you feel about where open world games have come from, where they're going? What are the sort of biomes or environments you like to explore? There's, and much like open world gaming, there's so many avenues to explore on this topic, and we want to hear from you about it. And you can reach out to us on a number of different platforms. We are Fun and Games Pod on Twitter Twitter, on Instagram. You can email us, funandgamespod@gmail.com. We love hearing from everybody. You can talk to us more directly as well. If you go to certainpov.com, you can check out not only previous episodes of this show, our other show, Side Quest, other fantastic nerdy podcasts on the network. You can also find a permanent invite link to our Discord server where we talk about gaming, comics, other forms of media, and just whatever else feels like being worth talking about, because, we won't know until you bring it up. And so we'd like you to do so.
Yeah, you can also rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice. It helps us to get featured. If you are on Good Pods especially, please rate us and review us there. We recently were added to their list of top 100 podcasts in technology and top 100 podcasts in video games, which is just awesome. So definitely go check that out. You can also, of course, rate and review us on Apple Pod and Spotify. Pretty much anywhere that has a review or rating option, give us one, because it helps us grow this incredible community.
Because I don't like to admit how much I need the validation, but you know what? This is a safe space. I need the validation. I won't speak for anybody else. That's what all of you are here for, because this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
So, I have a question. Have you ever wanted to get into comics, but you just didn't know where to start? Well, welcome to Comics Quest. I'm JD Martin, and every week I sit down with a guest to talk a comic that I think anybody can pick up and start their comics reading journey. We take a look at psychedelic sci-fi, fantastical action, heart-wrenching love stories, and of course, superheroes. So check us out at certainpov.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
CPOV. certainpov.com.